This report takes a different step. It's trying to hold the university and its history accountable to how different communities see themselves reflected in not only what's taught, but who's doing the teaching. So there's a real investment, I think, in how communities want to see themselves reflected in a national university in Scotland. Scotland's becoming more and more diverse. It's increased its racial and ethnic diversity every year. Every census tells us that. We should be responsible. We should show that we definitely reflect and have an interest in reflecting all types of knowledge from across the world, especially that is present here in Scotland.
Part of this project is about thinking about how the past continues to affect us today in terms of racial structures. So we've been really keen to join the dots between past and present. So we've had two research fellows who have been looking at, one of them's been looking at the history and legacies of African enslavement. So that's not just looking at financial legacies. That's something that a lot of other institutions have done. We have done that, but actually it becomes really difficult to put a final figure. You can't, it's impossible. But we've also been looking at, within that history of enslavement, the circulations of knowledge, of racialized forms of knowledge, knowledge extraction from the colonies. And then we had another research fellow looking at the history and legacies of colonialism. And he's been investigating things like the development of racialized forms of thinking, of racial hierarchies, particularly in relation to the Enlightenment, but also thinking a little bit about the university's connections to the East India Company, which were, again, extremely strong. So we've also been looking at the kind of data that the university collects in terms of its racial and ethnic minorities, and thinking about, is that data adequate? What does it tell us about pay gaps? What does it tell us about the representation of particular communities? And actually, like, there's a really stark underrepresentation of Black communities in particular. And then we've also had two academics who more recently have come on board, and they've been looking at the links between the institution and Israel and Palestine, recognizing that Arthur Balfour, our former chancellor, was also the author of the Balfour Declaration. So that, in a nutshell, is the kind of breadth and depth we've been able to go into, but there is so much more.
I was asked to chair something called the policy group within the Race Review, which sat alongside what we've always considered to be the main report where the historical findings and the deep research took place. Mainly to make sure that we could consider in advance, not waiting until the findings came out, but be ready so that executive could take decisions to move really quite quickly in some areas where we felt we should make important progress.
We have fundamentally changed what we have understood the Scottish Enlightenment to be. We have shown that there are legacies of discrimination that we still have to correct. This is a level of self-reflection that I think very few institutions have had the courage to truly embark on. We have to really focus on the idea that it's not just a few select individuals at the university that hold racist beliefs, that the university built part of its legacy and prestige on scholars who wanted to understand why Black people were the least intelligent, why Black people were the least moral, why Black people were the least beautiful in some writings. That idea, that intellectual curiosity that sustained the University of Edinburgh for so long, created students who were passionate to give money back to continue with that train of thought. So there was an investment by alum and students to keep racism alive, so to speak.
There's been some really outstanding research undertaken by the two historians involved. It makes a difficult read in many places. So, of course, there's a lot to reflect on in terms of how we're going to address and redress many of these issues. But it should also be a learning experience for everybody. And there's some really outstanding research to base that on.
As an intellectual, it gives me a lot to think about, new connections, new ideas, new paths of research. As a Black person, it makes me even sadder because it suggests that this view of anti-Blackness was not localized to the horrible history of slavery and the small-mindedness of white Americans, but in fact something that was shared and actually thought to be a product of the Scottish Enlightenment.